Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we're discussing Roboute Guilliman's Crossing of the Great Rift. How maybe the Necrons could be involved. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, undoubtedly the Imperium takes the crown for monumental returns. The Primarch Roboute Guilliman was resurrected from stasis, forever altering the fabric of the galaxy as we know it. And now, most recently, Lionel Johnson has awakened from his 10,000-year slumber. We're constantly on the lookout for hints of another loyal lost brother, and we're anxiously awaiting the answers to the T's of Valdor and the King in Yellow. However, for all of that, if I had to pick any event that could give those a run for their money, something that could cause galaxy-wide shockwaves in its own right, for me, it's got to be the return of the Silent King. That was something akin to a god returning to the galaxy. A figure and name of myth that dwarfed even that of a Primarch. And it felt for all certainty that the Necron race was about to dominate the galaxy in a major way. And they did in some ways for a time, with Sarek unleashing his Nexus Gambit, his intentions to turn back the flood of the Imperium. It became a very real threat for the Imperium for quite a while, and in lore terms technically still is. However, since that was in major focus, there hasn't been much else, as other races and factions have taken their time in the spotlight, with the narrative ultimately returning to Abaddon and Chaos. However, there has still been some developments on the Necrons that has maybe slipped under the radar somewhat. Upon Sarek's initial return, we saw that he didn't quite have true mastery of his race, as he may have done in the years before his exile. And that rather surprisingly, he was having to reassert his authority over the other dynasties. In typical Necron fashion, this was achieved through a lot of politics, deals and bargains being hashed out, favours called in, but also no small amount of force and threats. It was clear he had a battle on his hands, within his own race first and foremost. However, we have since received some intriguing little snippets and updates in White Dwarf magazine in previous months, and we did speak about them at the time also because I found them intriguing then. The first may be small, but for me incredibly important revelation was that we learnt Sarek's Nexus plan had gone off the rails a bit. That the forces under his control had fallen to doing what Necrons do best, mainly stabbing each other in the back half the time for personal glory or power. And so the Imperium had taken the advantage. Thus Sarek personally had to return and take control of the campaign, which he had done, quashing any infighting beneath his heel, overwhelming the Imperium with his unbridled power, and outmaneuvering them strategically, simultaneously conducting all his campaigns across the galaxy as he did so. Now, this was an awesome bit of fluff, showing how great the Silent King is, but it more importantly gave us an update on where he was and what he'd been doing. Quite simply having to smack his own forces into line and take control for himself. And the second key piece of information that we learnt in this time was that the Silent King by now had got most of all the Necron dynasties on his side, under his control. So Sarek's power base was finally starting to solidify and come together. Cue the Beatles. Of course, there is still the wildcard factor of Imhotep out there, a fan favourite of mine, as you know. I just love the idea of his continued rebellion and resistance. But him aside, it appeared the Silent King was now truly back in charge. It may not sound like much, but it's a very big deal. Even the smallest of Necron dynasties were star-spanning empires. And with each day that passes more of the tomb's awakening, this all meant that Sarek is in control of a truly apocalyptic force. Yes, he'll always have to deal with Pharaon politics, a bit like Guilliman and the High Lords of Terror, but that's just Necron life. And the final revelation we received from the White Dwarf campaign was that Guilliman, reading the reports of the battles the other side of the galaxy, came to the ultimate conclusion that all the Necron actions were part of a grander plan. Unfortunately, I haven't got the White Dwarf copy in front of me here to read the line exactly, but if memory serves, it definitely gave the impression Guilliman understood it was surely one mastermind responsible. And this all left me hugely excited for a possible meeting or encounter between Guilliman and the Silent King. It hasn't happened within the lore just yet, and it most certainly hasn't happened within a novel, which we would all love to see. But regardless, this all leads me to the discussion we had on Monday, and spoiler warning here for the latest Dawn of Fire series novel, The Martyr's Tomb, with the Necron Noctilith / Blackstone construction found within the Great Rift at the Attilan Gate. Now, of course, we are yet to see how the finding of the new crossing across the rift will affect things moving forward, but it's clear Guilliman wanted this found for his intended invasion of Imperium Nihilus, needing an alternative route to the embattled Nachmund Gauntlet. Yet with this seemingly Necron construction killing the tech priest Yazran who was investigating it, it does raise the question of if it will all be as simple or straightforward as Guilliman hopes. And could the Necrons now be involved in some capacity? Well, I think if we're going to be thinking and talking logically here, it's more likely to involve a certain Belisarius call. When we last left Guilliman at the end of the Dark Imperium series, the Plague Wars for Ultramar had largely been decided, with Mortarion being defeated. Thus Guilliman was now intent on that next step, his invasion of Imperium Nihilus, and he had summoned Belisarius to return to his side. Guilliman is no fool. He doesn't trust Belisarius' call entirely, wary of his ambition and certain the Magos is intentionally evasive, hiding some or many of his true actions. However, Guilliman also realises that Belisarius' call's work with the Blackstone pylons and Necron technology is extremely important to the Imperium's survival. Perhaps in truth its only hope. And so Guilliman will want Call to continue his investigations, and on finding this Necron device at the Attilan Gate, I'd find it extremely unlikely Guilliman wouldn't want Belisarius to investigate it. Or Belisarius wouldn't want to do so by himself anyway, probably becoming aware of it just as soon as Guilliman, if not beforehand anyway. So, Guilliman's crossing at the Attilan Gate could become closely involved with Belisarius's continued investigation, his working and experimentations with Necron technology. Given Belisarius' success at Sofa, I'd say he'd certainly have more success than poor old Yazran did anyway. However, is it possible we could instead see more Necron involvement? The device itself, whatever the truth of it may be, certainly seems powerful. It could well be something beyond Call's ability to control, meaning if Guilliman does want to cross the rift here, he may need help to do so. Necron help. Again, I think this one is admittedly pretty unlikely, but given the subtle build-up and tease of Guilliman becoming aware of the Silent King, or at least some form of mastermind or central power, it's not as impossible as maybe it once was. It's not impossible to think these two narratives could intertwine. Could the Necrons, aka Sarek himself, make some form of bargain or trade to help Guilliman cross the rift? As opposed as the Imperium and Necrons are, they at least share the same desire to stop the flood of the Immaterium. Guilliman just doesn't like how the Necrons are going about it. But there's at least some form of a shared goal there. There's also the fact the Necrons have put hostilities aside with the Imperium in face of a larger threat before. Even perhaps the Silent King himself, who made a pact with Dante to stop fighting each other and face the Tyranids. It's quite interesting that within that particular meeting, Sarek, if indeed it was Sarek, wore a mask modelled akin to Sanguinius, seemingly honouring the Blood Angels Primarch by saying he would have seen the logic in their alliance. It all gave rise to theories of Sarek maybe having met the Great Angel during the days of the Great Crusade, though I personally think that's unlikely. However, it certainly makes some form of interaction or barter between Guilliman and Sarek feasibly possible. If this was El Johnson we're talking about, I'd say absolutely not. But we've seen the Necrons and maybe Sarek have been willing to do so previously. And Guilliman's already proven he's willing to ally with Xenos if needed, with the presence of the Eldari Farseer Nataze within his inner council. Now, would Sarek work through minions or converse himself? And would he be willing to assist the Imperium freely, simply seeing them expending their forces across the rift against Chaos, preferable to his own dynasty's having to do so? Or would he require something in return? Personally, I think he'd be content with the Imperium doing all the work for him, seeing the lesser race as nothing more than cannon fodder anyway. It's pretty much the tactic he used in the allegiance with Dante. Again, of course, if that was truly him. But it's definitely interesting to think about, and it would at least serve as a good mechanic to have these two Lords of the Galaxy interact, as unlikely as it may be. An alternative and possibly more likely scenario is the Imperium having to take something of knowledge from the Necrons by force. So we could still have some Necron involvement in the crossing, just on a more standard format. Perhaps Belisarius needing to seek answers or acquire something from elsewhere before the crossing can be completed safely. Of course, maybe nothing will have to be done at all. Yazran's death will be forgotten, and Guilliman's fleets will cross freely. The whole interaction with the Necron device was nothing more than a little tease. But you wouldn't have thought so. The clear revelation of the Necron construction, the Magos dying from it, and his final thought of it being a ferryman who takes its toll, even if it just brings Call back into the picture, as is most likely, there has to be something about it going forward. And I'll admit, as unlikely as it is, I just can't help but hope. it all somehow brings on the next stage of the Silent King's narrative. But as always everyone, what do you think? How do you think this discovery of a Necron device at the Attilan Gate will affect the narrative moving forward? Will it, as I expect, most likely bring Belisarius Cawl back into the picture? Or could it in some way lead to interactions with the Necrons themselves? Will this be more a standard war format as usual? Or could it all in some way build up to that meeting between Guilliman and the Silent King? Could Sarek have his own interests in aiding Guilliman to cross the rift? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.